stopping by Pete's Garage. Now, just because we're moving along doesn't mean we're not going to do all the necessary checks. Before we stuff the pistons in, we are going to check our crankshaft end plate. Now to check this, we'll be using the scientific method, which is the BFS, the big freaking screwdriver. I'll put it in between, I'm on number 4 main here, and I'll put it in between the bearing and the crank, and I'll push it backwards to get it all the way to the back. And then once I have my indicator set up, I'll put it on this side and push it forward. So I'll push it all the way to the back, and let's go up front and set up our dial indicator. Now I have the dial indicator magnetic base set up on the block. I have the tip of the indicator right on into my crank, and I'll just zero this out. And using the scientific method, I will push the crank forward. Should have 3 to 5 thousandths. And right there is 5 thousandths right on the edge. Push it backward just to make sure, get back to 0, forward, 5 thousandths. Perfect. Now for the piston rod assembly, using a quality H-beam rod, offshore H-beam rod. It's a 274-1058 rod, quality H-beam rod with the ARP fasteners on the bottom. And these are Icon forged pistons. They're 30 over pistons. These are the IC 822030, I believe. And we have Cleveite bearings in here. Our Cleveite bearings, 527P-10, 10 over for those. And we'll be using the Liberty Performance Premium Molly Ring Set, LPM 5528-035. Now, even though they're a Liberty product, these are actually made by Mailey, so they are a quality product. You see they come first ring, second ring, third ring, oil ring with the wipers, and they're neatly packaged here. So we're going to gap these rings, make sure they're right before we put them on the pistons. Alright, now one thing I never really covered in any of my videos about building engines are file to fit piston rings. Now there are many reasons you'd want to use a file to fit ring. I'm not going to list them all, but you might have a slightly oversized cylinder and the standard piston ring doesn't fit correctly. You might have a building a racing engine, turbo engine, supercharged engine, and you want to make sure that the clearance or the gap in the ring is tighter or it's more accurate. There could be variation from cylinder to cylinder, so that if you buy a stock set of rings and you check the gap, one of them might be a tad smaller. And a 1/1000th diameter difference from cylinder to cylinder will mean different clearance or different gap in your piston rings. So these rings are file to fit. So we'll go through one piston. I'll do one piston where we'll file to fit the first ring, second ring, the oil wiper, and the 2 rails that go around the oil wiper. We'll install that piston, so at least you know the process to go through for one piston for all the rings, and then all you have to do is repeat it for the rest of the pistons. So let's do that right now. Okay, the general rule for most engines is the top ring, first ring, the gap should be 4.5 thousandths or 0.0045 times the bore. That'll give you your gap for that. The second ring, or the second compression ring, is 0.0035 times your bore for the gap on that ring. Your oil rails, the ones that go on either side of the wiper, minimum gap of 15 thousandths on those. Now the one ring that's really important to cover is the oil control ring or the wiper ring. This particular ring from Liberty, made by Molly, these are not file to fit. The rails and the wiper are not file to fit. They're made to fit the particular diameter for the bore that you purchase. And these colors, red and green here, have no significance other than in the manufacturing process they know what size these are for. So the red and green have nothing to do with sizing. But you can see here, if I put this in here, you can see that these overlap. See how it overlaps considerably there? Because this ring has to be put on under tension, which means it's bigger than the cylinder, and it's always being compressed, and it's pushing out against the cylinder. It's pushing out to wipe off the piston, and it's under tension. So what we're going to do is we're going to install this, and we're going to measure the tension and make sure it's correct. It's usually around 20 pounds. So in order to do this, I'm going to install just my wiper or my oil control ring on my piston. And I'm going to put it on just to make sure that it's not overlapping. I don't want it overlapping. I want it nice and even. And I'm going to install this backwards, upside down. Okay, now it's installed backwards. I'm going to push this down a little bit. I got some oil on the inside of the cylinder there. Now I'm going to push this down a little bit, and then we're going to measure our tension. All right, so our wiper, or our oil control ring, is under tension, meaning it's trying to push out on the cylinder, which means this is hard to move in and out of the cylinder. We want to measure that tension. We want to measure how much tension the piston is under, and I'm going to do that with a simple fish scale here. This is just a digital one. You can buy these for cheap as $5–10. And it's good to check the tension on all your oil wipers or oil control rings, regardless of if you're buying file to fit or not, because sometimes they ship the wrong ones. And if you have the wrong tension oil ring or oil control ring on your piston, it's going to burn oil. So what we're going to do is we're going to test this, and what I want to measure is I want to measure how much it takes to start this piston moving in the cylinder. And we'll see what we have here. Okay, so just to start moving. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 8, 16, what do we got, 18? 17? Let's see here, try it again. This thing makes a memory here, so I'll reset it to 0. We'll do it again. Okay, ready? Here we go. 14, 17, 16, 17. So it was like 17 pounds it took to get this piston moving, which means we're 17 pounds, which is not too bad. Should be 20, but 17 pounds is plenty enough for this engine. The other thing is very important to keep all of your rings separate. You don't want to mix up the top ring and the second ring. If you take the rings out of the package, the way they're shipped, you see they paint that red line on there, which is nice, but they both have red lines on there, the first and second ring. But if I take these and if I fan these out like a deck of cards, you can see that they're all labeled here. M top, M top, M top, M top, M top. So I'm sure I have all 8 top piston rings or number 1 rings here. That is real important. So take real care, or be very careful to make sure that you do not mix up your rings. Extremely important. Working with one piston at a time, I will put the wiper on, number 1, and I'm going to turn that about 30 degrees. I'll take my bottom rail and wrap it around my piston, and I am not dragging it, instead I'm lifting that up. I'm going to lift it up over my wiper to get that in there like that. I'll turn it another 30 degrees, and I'll put my top wiper in. Bring it around, and again, I'm not going to drag it across the face of the piston because I don't want to put a scratch on there, so I'm going to lift it up, fit it in place. Okay, now we got the first oil rings in place. Now let's measure and cut our second ring. Looking at these rings, they did a nice job of error proofing here, and you can see here's the difference between the 2 rings. You can see that this ring here, which is the second ring, is like a stamped in letter, and the lettering on the top ring is like a laser etched letter. So at least there's a way to tell them apart. That's one way. The other way is you can see this ring, the top ring, the cross section, it has this chamfer on it. See how they both have that chamfer? But one has a bigger chamfer than the other. So the top ring has a bigger chamfer and a different cross section than the second ring. Easy way to tell it apart. So we will set the second ring in place here, and I'll get the piston. And I'll just use the piston to get this straight in. Okay, and set that off to the side. Now you can see down here there's hardly any gap at all. I'd be surprised if there was a 1/1000 gap in there. So let's start with, let me see here. Two thousandths, check that gap there. 2 fits in. 25 fits in. Let's see what we got here. 4/1000 fits in. Just about. Let's try a 5. 5 does not fit in. So, using our formula, this is our second ring, so it's 0.0035 times our bore. So let's measure our bore. So we measure our bore. Come in here and measure. And we are right at 4.325 for the diameter. So 4.325 times 0.0035 equals 15 thousandths gap. So we had a 5 thousandths gap, which means we need to open it up 10 thousandths. So let's take that ring to our grinder and we'll grind it to set to fit. Here's a simple piston ring grinder and the gap grinder. You get at Summit Racing anywhere, they're like 45, 50 bucks, and it's worth it. And the ring simply goes in here like this. That way you're holding it flat on the surface and you grind either side, and these stops hold it from moving. But it's the way you do this that's important. So let's get a closer look. Here's the important part of grinding your rings. When you bring you only want to grind one side at a time. You want to take a little bit off each side, but when you bring the rings together, you want to make sure that you're holding the ring straight, meaning you don't want it like this or like that. You want to make sure that they're lined up kind of straight across. That way you're grinding it even. If you grind it on an angle like that, you'll have like a pie shape taken out of your ring, and that's not what you want. So you want to kind of get that lined up, and then when you take, just let one side off, press on the other side, and then turn your grinder the amount of times on each side. So let's say I'll go 5 times. Let me just go. Oh, it's tough to do. Let me switch hands here. I'll do it again. Make sure I'm doing this right so you can see it. Okay, I got it. Now, hold it. 2, 3, 4, 5, which is tough to do. This is not easy to do when you're filming, I'll tell you that. And this side, I'll take a light 5 off of this side as well. I'm hitting the light. Let's go see how that fits. All right, so we'll try it this way. Should have it done by now. That's 3 times that I ground this piston, the ring, to make sure that it didn't go too much. This should be right on 15 thousandths. I'll take my 15 thousandths shim, go to my gap. Perfect. Fits nice and even. Let's go up one more, see if I ground off more than I thought. Let's try 17. $17 won't go in. So I got it just right, 15, maybe 16 thousandths. Now, even though I'm done with that, I'm going to, let me show you what I'm going to do here. Again, I want to protect my engine to make sure I get nothing in here. The last thing I'm going to do on all these rings is, again, I'm going to take my file and I'm going to break the edges just a little bit. I'm going to make sure there aren't any burrs on the inside edges or the outside edges of the gap I just cut, and I'll just lightly hit those. And the ultimate test to make sure you have this done right is, let me set this aside. Take your piston, take the groove that it's going to go into, not the first groove but the second groove. You put the ring in the groove and it should slide nice and easy. If it slides nice and easy, you don't have any burrs, and that way you're sure you have it ground properly. Now I can do the number 1 ring, the top ring. Alright, our top ring, number 1 ring, and it's labeled right there top, so you know what the top of the ring is. I'll put this in here. Now this is a different number. It's 4.325 times 0.0045, which is, what is that, 19 thousandths? 18 thousandths? And that's a real small gap, so I'll grind this one the same way. Alright. Alright, we get that level in the bottom of the bore there. We're in the bore. Take our 19 thousandths, and it just fits in there just nice and neat. Okay, we're good. Now we can put the rings on the pistons and install. Important to do that grinding process away from your engine, away from your parts, and away from everything, because you don't want any of that piston ring dust getting in any of your piston or any of your engine parts, because it can ruin it. So I got this right side up. I'll use my piston ring pliers and get this down to my second groove, just like that. I'll have the whole assembly turn 90 degrees, or I'm sorry, a third turn. Make sure I have the right side up, and I do. Piston ring pliers. Open that up. Alright, now I'm ready to put that in. Little engine oil inside the bore. Number 1, got to make sure the chamfer on the connecting rod is facing towards the counterweight. The pin on the crankshaft is all the way down, so it's furthest away from the piston, so that way I'm sure I'm not going to hit it into it. And should be able to tap this right in. There we go. Okay, this is the you got to be careful part. You want to make sure your pin for your piston is farthest away, and I'm going to reach down in here and I'm going to lift up my rod, the rod for the connecting rod. I have my bearing shell in here. I'll put the bearing in the rod here, line up my lock notch, make sure it's in the right place. I got a lot of lube on the bearing. Now I'm going to tap this into place, making sure I don't hit the pin because I don't want to nick it. So I very carefully sneak up on that like that. Nice and tight. Now I have my lower bearing cap, lock notch to lock notch. Go on there just like that. Make sure I'm on there all the way. Okay, and I'm just going to turn this a little bit so I can get to it. Now I'm just going to tighten these down by hand, and I'm going to do that for all the pistons until I get them all in place. I'm going to get that one, I'll put the second one on, and then I'll rotate it to make sure there's no binding up anywhere on this first journal. Okay, I have number 1, number 2 in, and now I can torque these down to 60 foot-pounds in 3 equal steps. Okay, 1 step. Second step, and last step is 60 foot-pounds. we check to make sure there's no binding. Everything rotates nice and free. All right, fantastic. What do we got now? 3, 4, 5, 30 more rings to grind and 6 pistons to go. And next 2 pistons, 60 foot-pounds. And rotating nice and smooth. Next 2 pistons. And still rolling nice and smooth. And our last 2. Make sure we go nice and free. Nice and smooth all the way around. All right, there you have it. All of our pistons are installed. I rotated several times and everything is nice and smooth. Now, it took quite a bit of time to hand grind all of those piston rings, to hand gap them. It takes a lot of time. So if you're going to do this job, don't try and rush it. It took me, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours on a Saturday afternoon to do all of those rings individually. So it does take some time, but have some patience. Check them 3 or 4 times. You don't want to overgrind it, and you should have no problem whatsoever. If you'd like to follow along with this series, please click on subscribe. And if you click on the little bell next to subscribe, you'll get a notification every time I upload a video. Thanks for stopping by Pete's Garage.